Welcome to Watch Your Point Overtime, and I had my plan, but because I'm a people pleaser, I'm going to go with the panel's plan. Charles, it was turmoil this week. I called people up and said, "Wow, somebody launched the kill shot on Troy Finner," and I say that, political kill shot, that they had this sitting in position, proof that he was at least aware of one major incident when the case was shelved. Any thoughts you can share? You've been talking to various council members. There was a lot of, I wouldn't say shock, but I would say there was some resentment that it happened the way it happened.
Yeah, I think from everybody I've heard that has been mad about it, they were upset about the way that it happened, and I'm going to say the way that it's rumored to have happened, because I don't know what actually happened behind the scenes, but they feel that he deserved a little bit better and how he was treated. Listen, I think no matter how you did it, people are going to be upset about it. I think you're going to have people who are upset, you're going to have people who are relieved, but ultimately I think all the conversation surrounding that distracts us from the victims, but also distracts us from the structural changes that need to happen within the department to make sure something like this doesn't happen again. Because these people, many of these people who kept this a secret, I would assume, are still there. I know early on in this they said that one of the people who had either created the code or first used it is no longer with the department, but there are other people around. This wasn't done in a vacuum, and so I think we can't have this false sense of relief that everything's taken care of when it's really not. And I think more answers need to come out, I think, to really reassure the public.
Okay, during our ongoing conversation, both you and Holly, Paul, always Bill, but y'all have advocated for the victims in this, because there were some serious crimes that just flat were kicked to the curb. And so while Finner is the last man holding the bag for something that went on since 2014 at least.
Well, I think
the fact is that some of these crimes happened on his watch and were not investigated, and that's a problem.
That's a huge problem, and your heart just has to break for some of these victims, right? And I think there's another report that came out yesterday about, in some cases, the victims or the family of the victim haven't even been notified of what's going on. They had no idea that their case was suspended or the investigation was suspended. We do have at least one example where an offender in an alleged sex crime went on to reoffend and possibly rape or assault another person. This is just horrific, and restoring confidence in the Houston Police Department is going to take a long time and a lot of action. And I feel for Finner. I tend to think that he was made the scapegoat in this situation. But again, as we said earlier in the show, the horrifying thing is that there had to be multiple officers who were participating in this suspending of these incidents. Yeah, some of them may have been mistakes, some of them may have been relatively minor, but at the end of the day, even those burglaries, they're not victimless crimes. We all suffer when these things are left unaddressed.
Okay, context here, and we actually practice that sometimes on this show, but let's talk about Finner is dealing with 5,000 cops for 2.5 million people, a judiciary that's sending violent criminals out on multiple bonds. As soon as they can commit and be caught, they're put back out on the street again during a pandemic with a major disaster in the Castro world situation that was going on. There's lots of things. I really like and respect Troy Finner.
Wait, can I just add something to that real quick? If you look, I looked this up because I was very curious. If you look the day after that email was sent that he responded to, what happened was that doctor who was riding his bike to work in the medical center and got shot and killed, and all the cops kind of descended on the medical center after that, happened the day after. So I can also see why, with all those things going on.
Look, if he had to do things over again, I think he would do them differently. But there was also incredible pressure. Bill, I want to ask you, do you think there was pressure from the Turner administration to create at least the image of progress on the criminal justice front? Because public safety, our confidence in it was in a free fall.
There's no saying in government you should never attribute anything to conspiracy or malice that can be explained with incompetence and sloth. And I think this is really more that latter category. I talked to the captain that actually created the code, who's now retired, guy I know pretty well. And the whole purpose of the code was to demonstrate how many cases they couldn't get to because of a lack of manpower. There was nothing secret about it. It was actually supposed to be highlighted. That was the original purpose it was set for. Now, someplace along the line, they lost control of the coding on it, and all kinds of things started being thrown in there. But I'll get back to what I said during the show. The scandal here is not that this code was created. It may be the way it was used, but the real scandal is that for decades before this code was ever created, these same thousands of cases were not investigated. This is nothing new. The only thing that's new here is that we kind of have some idea about how many there were. By the way, this goes on at the Sheriff's Department. It goes on at every other major police department. The clearance rates at HPD are actually a little bit better than most of the other agencies in Harris County. But it's still ridiculous that we only solve 25, 30% of the rapes. I mean, seriously? I mean, we can't get justice to more than 25 or 30% of the people who have been, sexually assaulted. It's an embarrassment. The crime lab's, a year behind on processing rape kits right now? I mean, this is just ridiculous. And look, I love Troy Finner, a great, great guy. But the truth is, HPD needs an overhaul. And I think you've got to bring somebody in from the outside to do that.
Paul, I'm sitting here thinking about how much of government is predicated on a lie. I mean, we've talked for years about how we had a structurally unbalanced budget, and now that we've kind of come to Jesus, so to speak, and said we're going to do it the right way, and all of a sudden we have a deficit. Well, we were doing our policing the same way. What did we really think was going to happen when you have 5,000 cops, 1,500 of which or 2,000 of which are behind a desk for 2.5 million people? I mean,
right.
Paul, thoughts?
Yeah, so there's a lack of faith. So right now when you look at violent crimes in the Harris County area, what you're seeing is a great number of them, I think it's close to 50% that are reported, are actually domestic violence crimes. And so when you have something like this that shows up, and now I'm a battered woman, right? And why would I risk reporting something when it could just be coded to, we don't have enough police officers, right? It's some administrative issue that I have no control over. These are people who are not paying a lot of attention to all the dynamics and the politics behind what's happening. What they're concerned about is, if I report this, am I going to wind up dead? And that is what's happening right now across homes in the Harris County area. These are all being tracked very closely. I get to work with Commissioner Garcia on one of his task force, and one of the things they look at is, where are the hot spots, where are they happening? And everybody on the panel who works for the city or the Harris County is all saying the same thing. None of these things are surprises. They know where these events are happening. They know why they're happening. They often know who's going to be doing them. They check in with these people on a regular basis. And the people on the victim side right now are looking at all of this happening, and they're thinking, that doesn't matter. What matters to me is, am I going to be safe? Can I report this and trust that the system is going to handle it? Right now, the answer is a resounding no.
Yeah, it's a fragile chain, this criminal justice system, and we have a significant number of the judiciary who are immediately going to push, likely perpetrators back on the street to reoffend. Doesn't engender a lot of trust. I want to switch gears real quick to the firefighter settlement, because there are those around, that watch city council that are kind of counting votes right now. And while I'm not sure they could spike this deal, are there folks that are willing to go up against the mayor on this as it stands, and what do they need to hear to get on board this deal that they knew was coming? They knew that this liability, this balloon note was coming. It was owed, and you can't walk away from it. I mean, what do they need to hear, Charles?
I mean, just from watching the BFA and labor committee meetings, it certainly seems as though with the level of pushback, there are some who are willing to, and how many, who knows. But I do think that at least for the go forward. I don't know what they need to hear for the settlement, but at least for the go forward, there have been a lot of questions they laid out surrounding incentive pay and some of the restrictions about restricting the mayor to pick a fire chief from the department and different things like that that haven't been addressed for them. And those questions came up at the first meeting, they came up at the second meeting, and they haven't. And I think the bigger thing that they bring up is that they have not received the CBA. They don't actually know what's in it formally because they've only had leaked copies given to them. And so I think you got to start there. They've got to see it and then be able to kind of actually propose questions. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the mayor's the negotiator on this. They're going to be presented it. They could ask the mayor for tweaks. If those happen, they happen. If they don't, they don't. But I think it's hard. What I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from these meetings is that it's hard for them to say anything one way or the other without having something in front of them. And at the last BFA labor meeting, no one really asked questions because there was no new information to present. It was just kind of the same thing all over again.
Bill, I'm gonna opine a little bit here. What kind of sticks in my craw is watching members of council who are demanding of this mayor something they were flat unwilling to go public and demand from the previous mayor.
Right, yeah, I mean, most of these people voted for millions of dollars of legal fees to keep fighting this for the entire time that Turner was there. Look, I think they've got a fair gripe that we don't have enough information about the settlement yet. Now, some of that's because I think John got a little ahead of himself in, announcing this deal before it was actually finalized. I'd have probably waited until I had something to show on the final agreement. But having said that, my guess is that when it comes down to a vote at council, if you're sitting on council, here's what you have to vote for. I'm either going to vote to approve this deal, or I'm going to vote to send it to trial, and then I'll be responsible for the results of what happens at trial. I don't think you got many people willing to have the guts to do that on city council.
Would it have been a good move to have somebody like Castix Tatum sit in on the negotiations?
If I'd been mayor, I would not have done that.
Right.
I would have had nobody from council. I certainly wouldn't have had the controller there. That's actually sort of a conflict of interest to have the controller there. I would have had my key staff people in the negotiating room, which is what, look, the mayor is the chief executive of the, these people are legislators, They certainly have the right to ask questions. They have the right to approve or disapprove or whatever, but they don't run the city on a day-to-day basis. So I've got no problem with the way that was conducted.
Paul, what's your sense of things if, as Charles and I think Bill and certainly Tomaro have said, they think that it probably should go on the ballot just for a ratification from the voters? Do you think that would be a good thing, even though they clearly, based upon my read of the law, don't have to?
Yeah. If they don't have to, if I were mayor, I wouldn't do that. But I do understand why that's something that I think could happen. I mean, it's $1.5 billion. It's going to be a 30-year debt. There are a lot of long-term responsibilities you're putting on a city that is, in essence, shrinking. And the number of households in Houston to support that level of debt for something, I think it's something that should be put to a vote. I also think the voters would support it.
Well, basics.
I can't imagine the voters turning it down, and I think it would be a politically astute move to put it on the ballot. And the big problem here, as everybody has discussed, is that we really still don't have the details, and so it is legitimate to ask questions. Holland's math may be off, and I appreciate the information Bill shared today, but we're talking about a very large sum of money saddling the residents of Houston with long-term debt. I think everyone agrees they'd like to do right by the firefighters, but that doesn't mean that, pardon the expression, that we should crucify the taxpayers for the sins of Sylvester Turner, right? We need to make sure this is a good deal for both the firefighters and the city going forward in the long term. I was just listening to a podcast about the city of Chicago and the debt per resident that they have because of a similar kind of deal for back pay for police some years ago that they're still trying to pay off. It's an incredible amount of money, and it can really, devastate the city's finances further than they're already.
And to Bill's point, I think the biggest issue here seems to be getting out so early and saying, and I guess they wanted to make that 60-day mark, and saying that we have a deal, because you then maximize this amount of time that there's just going to be pure speculation and it's just commentary.
People shooting at it.
People shooting at it, and if you would have just kind of waited until it was ready to go and you had 2 weeks before you were bringing it to council or something like that, you would minimize it, and I think you'd have less problems. But I think you just have all this time now.
Okay, and you guys, we all have friends who are on the unions. And we talked earlier about shifting some of the sales tax money that the city gives Metro to address really serious problems and the deficit. The other issue, and people don't like to talk about it, certainly Bill, it might have cost him election, but Bill said, like, it is a just rock solid, logical move for new hires to go to defined contribution for their retirement. And how much would that save us?
Well, it depends on how you structure the program and everything. The problem with defined benefit is we have no idea what they really cost us, because the cost is based on a bunch of future events and that we're guessing about. And I'll give you an example. One of the most important factors in trying to figure out what a defined benefit plan is how long people are going to live. So if you have something like a pandemic come along that kills a number of people early, that saves you money. But if MD Anderson goes out and cures cancer next week, great day for humanity, a really bad day for pension plans, because all of a sudden you've added a bunch of longevity to it. And we don't know any of those answers, and so we just make these wild guesses, and because those wild guesses end up being amount that we fund, what do? We have a bias to understate it all the time. That's why these plans are always underfunded. Look, the truth of the matter is that most law enforcement officers in the state of Texas are already in what's called a cash balance plan, which is a sort of hybrid between defined benefit and defined contributions. When I was mayor of Kemah, all my police officers were in the state plan, which is a cash balance plan. It works a lot better than these defined benefits do. It's still not perfect. It's not a pure defined contribution, but it works a whole lot better. All the state employees in the last legislative session were moved from defined benefit to defined contribution plans. 99% of the private sector went to this decades ago. These plans are not sustainable in the long run, and eventually, sooner or later, we're going to have to get rid of them.
Okay, before that great day when I met Charles Blain, long before then, I remember doing stories on the enormous lump sum payouts that some of our first responders were getting, like $1.5 million, and they were common, and there were like 40 and 50 of these guys a year were getting $1 million plus their pension. I mean, look, God bless them. Appreciate their service. Is that good government, moving away from defined benefit?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think an appeal of government jobs has long been the pay you get, but also just the kind of stability you get. And this is why so many people, especially back in the day, a lot of minorities went towards government jobs. But they get expensive for the taxpayers in the end, like Bill was saying, when you have people who are living longer, and also when you have people who, on the healthcare side, the healthcare liability, people who are living longer and getting sicker and having to deal with those issues. Now that's costly too, and those are both things the taxpayers have to shoulder the burden for. And so, yeah, this conversation about shifting our employees from defined benefit to defined contributions going back at least since your election with Turner, but probably before then, I'm sure it was touched upon. And so everybody else is doing it. We know it's successful. We know that we don't have the money to sustain what we're doing. And at some point, the rubber's going to meet the road. We're going to have to do something. And why not do it before it gets so bad that we're forced to do it?
Is a very generous program like an 8% match or a 7% match still cost effective, Bill?
That'd be a lot cheaper than what we're doing now. We put in 31% now to the firefighter, and about the same for the police too. The municipal union's a little bit less, but it's just not sustainable. It's just not. I'm sorry, and sooner or later it's going to be changed. And look, the thing is, if you don't make these kind of changes, if you insist on continuing to do things that are financially not viable, then the city becomes unviable. And we're already seeing that with the city of Houston. Our population has been the same now for 7 years in a row. By the way, we'll get new population numbers this week probably for the city of Houston, the new estimate. We'll see what happens. But the large cities in America have been losing population steadily over the last decade. People are deciding that with the crime, with the bad schools, with the high taxes, with all these problems, poor services, I'm going to move out to the suburbs. And so Montgomery County and Fort Bend County are exploding. Harris County is just about barely growing, and the city of Houston is flat. There's consequences to the decision. People don't have to continue to live in a particular place.
Yeah, arbiters of fairness would be, some of my top picks would be Paul Castro and Holly Hansen. If new employees come into a situation, eyes wide open, knowing that, hey, I'm going to get a 7% match, that's pretty good, probably get a little higher salary. Is that fair? And I'll start with you.
Absolutely, that's fair. If you're signing on to a new job, you look at the offer, you look at what's available, and you sign up for that. And that's pretty generous. I'd say 7% match is quite generous compared to those of us who work in the private sector and what we look at. And you have to be more responsible in planning for your own retirement. To Bill's point, these cities that have done this, they're finding it's not sustainable, and the only reason that they're still functioning on some levels because they keep getting bailed out by the federal government. At some point, the federal taxpayers are not going to be able to bail out all these municipalities that are offering these defined benefit plans where there's only a limited amount of money you can print, but it's that's whole nother conversation.
I was just guffawing the other day when we were talking about the guaranteed income program that said, hey, it's federal money. It's federal money. Like we didn't pay part of that. Paul, the fairness of going to defined contribution.
Yeah, I think it's fair. If you know what you're going to, getting into when you sign up for it, that's great. I'm reminded of this idea called the Lucretius problem, which is this thought that the only thing that can happen on the bad side is the worst thing that's ever happened historically. We're limited by that. I think that there are a lot of things that are changing in our environment, in our culture, that are making things different, more challenging as we move forward. Houston has traditionally been a city that is a can-do, future-focused community. And right now I feel like we're getting stagnant. And my worry is that we're trying to solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's tools, and that's not working out.
Yeah, I want to go back to a Bill King nugget, illustrative of that of the situation of stagnation. There were as many people living inside Loop 610 in 1951 as there are today.
1960 as there are today.
Yeah, so all that going on. Okay, what did we miss? Okay, Bill, I'm going to start with you. Issue that needs to be talked about, briefly.
Well, I tell you, I'm going to be writing about this the next couple of weeks here, which is air emissions, air quality. One thing that we've missed is there has been enormous improvement in air quality over the last 4 or 5 decades, primarily because of federal regulation, the clean air standards, what we made people do with cars, but like lead cut the emissions by 99%, ozone emission, the precursors of ozone, and those emissions are down dramatically. Particulate matter's down. We still have some issues and some problems, but there's been enormous improvement, and I don't see much perception in the public of that improvement. I saw this, people complaining about air quality, but the truth is it's a lot better than it was 50 years ago.
So we can shed the title Carcinogenic Coast. I love that. Anyway, Charles, what's going on?
I don't know if you guys talked about this on the show, but last week the Texas Commission on Jail Standards dinged the county jail for not having a good inmate. It's continuing to not have a good inmate to jailer ratio. And then I guess it was yesterday or the day before, 3 of the jailers who, I don't know if they assaulted or one of the inmates or beat him, they were indicted for that. And so clearly a lot of issues in the Harris County Jail that still need fixing.
Maybe the state ought to take it over.
I mean,
I think that's viable, right?
Holly's been doing some great work down in Bill's old neck of the woods, Kemah. Tell us something sassy, salacious.
It's interesting, and I would have liked to have incorporated into my article about Finner's resignation, retirement. You have a situation with the police chief, a lot of publicity, a lot of media attention on the police chief, and politically speaking, he really had to go, whether or not he was culpable. In Kemah, you have a situation where there are complaints from officers about a police chief. The city hired a law firm to conduct an investigation. They conduct an investigation, they present a report, and citizens want to get a hold of this report and these complaints, want to know what's going on. The city appeals to the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General says you've got to release the documents. So the city turned around and sued the Attorney General so they don't have to release the documents. So everybody's going, what's going on with this police chief in this little town? Yeah, very small town compared to Houston, you know, what, 2,000, a little over 2,000 people now. But, you know, a lot of questions there. The other thing that I saw this week that I thought was interesting, there's a Supreme Court ruling on civil asset forfeiture. It's not out of the state of Texas, but it kind of parallels some things that are going on here in the courts. There's a lawsuit pending against Harris County right now over civil asset forfeiture, where Harris County Sheriff's deputies seized cash from a guy who was traveling through. What he was doing with the cash, you know, is not clear, but he had $42,000. He claims this is life savings. Even though they confiscated the money, they never charged him with a crime. He's not being investigated for a crime, but they're not returning the cash. So, I mean, these are some questions about our civil liberties and our rights. You know, do we have a right to property? What can you do if the government's taken your property?
Bill always carries around 10 grand in cash.
He probably
just
does.
in case. Just real quickly, hey, have you run into a situation as superintendent of a school where you felt like you wanted to cull material in a textbook?
Oh, no. I've not done that, but I can also tell you that there are things that are missing from a lot of textbooks that I think I wish that were in there.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Hey, everybody, have a great week. We hope to see you right here next week. This is airing on Mother's Day.
Woohoo.
Happy
Okay.
Mother's Day.
Happy
So
Mother's Day.
have a great day, moms.
Yeah.